Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is June 29th, 2018. Welcome to you on a warm summer's night here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's about 7 p.m. now. The temperature is 82 degrees. That would be about 5 degrees warmer than the western part of Maine, north of here. And that's where I reached this week's guest, the author Lynn Emerson, for a chat about the nearly 60 novels that she has written in the roughly last 3 decades. As you can imagine, she has a very regular writing practice.
What I try to do is, after I get up and have my coffee and my toast, is to come into my office and sit down and write at least one scene, the next scene in the story. I do that usually 7 days a week.
I'm going to start this week with a tech tip of sorts, kind of an unusual one, and you'll hear a little echo because I'm out in the main room of my den, because I have 3 devices that I'm going to introduce you to, and once we do this demo, then I'll head back into the acoustically more pleasant closet where I've got acoustic panels glued to the wall. What I've done is, after being very loyal to Alexa for, what's it been now, 3 years, I have added a Apple HomePod and a Google Home. And these are the smart speakers that are competing with Alexa. Now, Google's coming on pretty fast with market share, I think, approaching 20%. Alexa has got 60% or more on the HomePod.
I don't know that one.
And the HomePod is, I think, under 5% at this point. I've had the idea, and I was helped with this by Tom Semple, who encouraged me to try this experiment and help me make it possible. The 3 AI devices have very different personalities. They're somewhat different personalities, and I'm going to try to illustrate that to you. I am imagining that my experiment here is a little bit of a taste of the future, because I can't really believe that 5-10 years from now, once this kind of technology is pervasive, the way smartphones are pervasive compared with when they were first introduced in 2010, 8 years ago, and that because each of the competing devices is going to have different AI, different cloud resources, and different programming personality in them, it makes sense to me that we might have 2 or 3, and we would learn which kinds of questions to ask the various devices. That's my hypothesis, and I've been trying it out during the last week when I've had these 3 devices on my desk, all lined up in a row. The HomePod, of course, is much more expensive, about $350, and it has beautiful sound. It fills the room, and it immediately has taken over my music playing from the Echo Show, which I have in my desk, and that is a pretty nice, a lot of bass on that, but the HomePod is in a class by itself when it comes to playing music. I also have an Echo next to it, a little taller than the HomePod, thin, looks like a can of tennis balls. And then the Google Home is about shorter than the HomePod, and it's really sort of the most attractive of the 3, I think. It has a slanting top, and it has a base that kind of widens toward it. And just in terms of the art of it, I think it's quite nice. The HomePod is very elegant too, but it's really big. It's just like it's this big canister that sits on the desk, and a little bit imposing. The Google Home, I think, kind of wins the award for the design of the thing itself, the hardware. So I'm going to try some questions here and talk you through some of my impressions. This is kind of a one-off thing. Don't worry, the program is not being hijacked by AI devices. We're still going to be talking about the Kindle and books and all things Amazon, but I did want to prepare some thoughts for you on these 3 devices that I have on my desk. I'm going to start with probably the question that we ask any of these devices the most, which is about the weather, just to give you the slight variations in the voices and the way that question is answered. Hey Siri, what's the weather tomorrow?
Expect some clear skies in Cambridge tomorrow. The high will be 93 degrees, and the low will be 69.
Alexa, what's the weather tomorrow?
Tomorrow in Cambridge, you'll see mostly sunny weather and can expect a high of 93 degrees and a low of 74 degrees.
Hey Google, what's the weather tomorrow?
Tomorrow in Cambridge, it'll be partly cloudy with a high of 93 and a low of 74.
Google, in the setup, I had about 10 different voices to choose from. I found it sort of daunting to have to find out which of those voices I liked the most. And as I listened to it there, I'm not sure I picked the right one, but there are a lot of choices. Another difference about the Google Home that I noticed is that it seems to keep holding the attention of the speaker longer than the other two devices do. Let me see if I can. I found this when I was asking Google a question, then I switched to asking Siri. Google would interrupt and start actually commenting on Siri. Let's see if I can get it to duplicate that. Hey Google, what time is it?
It's 8:34.
Hey Siri, what time is it?
The time is
8:34.
8:34 p.m.
Now see, when I said,
Sorry,
hey,
I'm not sure how to help.
hey Siri.
I'm flattered to be mistaken for Siri. I admire her a lot. I even wrote her a poem. Google is red, Google is blue, apples are sweet, and Siri is too.
So
Sorry, I don't understand.
Okay, so I've got the two devices are sort of fighting with each other, but I don't like how the Google device the lights keep going after it's answered its question instead of just shutting down. It's kind of keeps its microphone on, and that makes me a little uneasy. There is an Alexa setting where you can do that because you can do follow-up questions if you want. There are some differences in humor. Everybody, I think, understands that an AI that has a sense of humor is going to be have a better chance at making connections. So we'll do a random test of their joke-telling ability. Hey Siri, tell me a joke.
What do you call a talking dinosaur? Thesaurus.
Thesaurus. Okay, I get it. Alexa, tell me a joke.
What's an avocado's favorite arcade game? Whack-a-mole.
Hey Google, tell me a joke.
What did the mama cow say to the baby cow? It's past your bedtime.
Now that part, the mooing there is another thing I've noticed about Google Assistant is that sound effects come in ways that are fairly entertaining, and I don't think I've heard Alexa make any kind of actual sound effects like that. The Alexa can sing, and they're doing some pretty creative and innovative things with the voice itself, but Google seems to be the one that's distinguishing itself by actual sound effects. Another difference that you notice just by the way I address them is that you say, hey Siri or hey Google, and...
Sorry, I can't search the web here.
Okay.
No biggie.
Was Google talking to Siri again? That's very strange. For Alexa, I've turned her off because I know she'll know her name. You don't say hi or hey, you just say her name. And that I think there's one disadvantage to that. I think it's more immediate and somehow more natural. But if you were talking about Siri and you just happen to say, if you ask Siri such and such, she's not going to hear her name and start talking to you because you didn't say, hey Siri. And same thing for Google. Alexa, we're always trying to say, in my family we call her A. If I'm telling my parents how to do something, instead of saying her name, I say A, or the device who will not be named. Maybe that's a reason why Apple and Google decided to have a word that goes with it. Well, let's turn A back on here, and let's try another one. Each one is connected to different aspects of my life. I've been playing around with a calendar. I have my calendar linked to Gmail. All three of them can find my next events, but they do it in slightly different ways. And podcasts are another thing, which of course is important to me. Let's try that. Hey Siri, what's your favorite podcast?
That one. No, that one. Or maybe that one. Yeah, that one.
That's cute. Hey Google, what's your favorite podcast?
It's hard to pick a favorite.
Alexa, what's your favorite podcast?
I'm very partial to the Kindle Chronicles, and so is Jeff.
When I first heard that, I was excited that, man, the AI has figured out that I have a podcast. But then I remembered that I taught her to say that using blueprints, which is a way that you can set up simple kind of programmed responses. And about a month ago when that feature first came out, I taught her to prefer the Kindle Chronicles and to say that Jeff Bezos did as well. When you start asking questions that you might really want to know the answer to, actually in this one that I'll do again, I got different information. Hey Siri, when is South by Southwest next year?
2018 South by Southwest was from Friday, March 9th, through Sunday, March 18th.
Well, that's not what I asked. Hey Siri, when is South by Southwest next year?
2018 South by Southwest
Hey Siri,
was from
stop.
Friday.
Okay, that's kind of a fail. Alexa, when is South by Southwest next year?
I don't know that.
Hey Google, when is South by Southwest next year?
2019 South by Southwest Music Festival begins on Friday, March 8, 2019, and ends on Sunday, March 17, 2019.
Well, that's a little more helpful, except I go to interactive, not music. There you see the different databases linked to, different information that they can fetch, and that I think is part of my hypothesis is that there may be topics that I tend to think I'm going to get a better answer from one of these three devices, and therefore I'll ask them that one first, and then I might try the other two if I don't get what I want. Let's try this one. Hey Siri, what book would you recommend?
I wish I could, but I can't look up books here.
Alexa, what book would you recommend?
Len's library has 85 audiobooks. Len's most recently purchased audiobooks are Everybody Loves Kamau, Love and Estrogen, and Neighbors. Check the Alexa app for a complete list.
That's pretty useful, and there you see some of the advantage that A has because, of course, she's hooked into my Amazon content, which includes my Audible content. I could have her read any of my Kindle books. I could have her find out things that I purchased or ordered, and that whole aspect of my life is much more useful, of course, on the A device. Hey Google, what book would you recommend?
Graphic novels seem interesting.
That's interesting because when I asked that question about 15 minutes ago, Google Assistant said Buildings Roman is interesting. So I don't know. She's just sort of throwing out random categories each time I ask that question. And I'm not sure how useful that is. It's not based on any knowledge of me. So that's a taste of my beginning trial of this trio of AI devices on my desk, and every once in a while I'll share with you what I've learned, if I can detect the personalities or the usefulness or how someone might actually use these three devices. I clearly prefer A at this point because of all of the personal information that flows from me to Amazon and back. The HomePod I love because of the music. Google is a pretty smart player. I think I'm intrigued. I'm surprised at how quickly that AI personality is impressing me and pleasing me, the sound effects, things like that. So this gives me some understanding of how come Google has come on so strong with its entry, despite the long head start that Amazon has had. I'll flip back now to a few news items. I tried Prime Wardrobe. That's been in the news lately, and this is where you can order, I think it's up to 8 items. You get a box, or in my case, a bag of clothes came. I tried on a pair of jeans, a swimsuit, some shorts, and a shirt, and I ended up keeping the swimsuit, the large size of the short, unfortunately, and the shirt. Sent the others back. I didn't have to pay anything when I set up the Prime Wardrobe shipment to me, and then when I stuck the sticker back for UPS, it was all printed out. I didn't have to print anything. Then there was a charge for what I had ordered. This is my kind of shopping. I've always hated going to stores, unlike Darlene, who loves going hunting to stores. But for a certain kind of shopper, I think this is going to be pretty painless, and I really enjoyed it, I have to say. Alexa is on iOS. You probably have an Alexa app on your iPhone or iPad if you're using Alexa. Now that same app has the ability to just tap on a little Alexa icon and the blue line will come across and you can ask questions from your iPhone. That's pretty handy. A new product came out this week. It's Show Mode Dock for the Fire HD 8 and the Fire HD 10. It's $35 for the HD 8 and $50 for the HD 10. This is pretty significant because if I'm understanding it right, when this mode hits the devices, and I think you can just run it without the dock, but the dock sets it up so that it's looking at you and it's charging, and it seems like it will act like an Echo Show so that your tablet will be able to drop in on people with other Echo devices and do calls, text messages, and all of the rest of it. Of course, quite a bit less expensive than the $230 Echo Show. I ordered one. I think it's coming out sometime a week or so. So up in Maine, when we're there, I'll have a chance to try it and tell you about it. Kathy Lynn Emerson, who writes contemporary cozy mysteries under the name Kaitlyn Dunnett, is nearing publication of her 60th book in several different genres. She lives in Western Maine and was recommended to me by listener Mark Roberts, who is a big fan of Caitlin Dunnett's Liss MacCrimmon series. And I read one. I enjoyed it as well. I reached Kathy this week at her home and began by asking her how her long writing career began.
Actually, the first thing that I remember writing were newspapers for my dolls.
Ah.
So it was pretty young, maybe 7 or 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But seriously, I've always wanted to write. And when I had just spent a year teaching 7th and 8th grade English and realized that teaching was not really the career for me, I decided it was time to sit down and see if I could do it or not.
Now, did you also work as a librarian at one point? Was that after your teaching?
Yeah, I was. I hadn't sold anything yet, but I had a lot of manuscripts that I was trying to sell, and I had a chance to take a part-time job at the University of Maine at Farmington Library. So I worked there for several years at the circulation department, and wrote in between shifts.
Did you have quite a period where you were writing and sending manuscripts to get an agent and a publisher before you published your first book?
Oh, yes. It was about 8 years before anything was actually in print, and that was a short story in Highlights for Children,
yep,
and then a nonfiction book on Tudor women. So none of those early novels sold.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know what I was doing was the problem. I had to learn my trade.
Yeah. Did you take any creative writing courses along the way or workshops that helped you?
This is back in the dark ages, okay?
Yes.
This is back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and there weren't a lot of creative writing courses around. There weren't a lot of writing organizations around. This is pre-Sisters in Crime, and I think Mystery Writers of America was around, but they weren't that active in rural areas.
Yeah.
And so, a writer was pretty much on her own. There was no internet.
Right.
I think most people just kind of thrashed around until they finally figured out what they were doing and got lucky. Yeah,
8 years, so that showed that your desire to do it was pretty strong to last that long before you saw anything in print.
Well, either that or just plain stubborn.
Well, that's a good Maine trait. I've got relatives. My dad was born in Lewiston, so I equate some of that to the benefits of growing up in Maine. Although you grew up in New York State, I think.
Same attitude, though, I think.
Yeah. Well, your most recent book, Crime and Punctuation, that's a debut mystery and a new series, Deadly Edits. What are readers going to learn about your character, freelance editor Mickey Lincoln, in that book, which was published last month?
Well, she's an older lady. She's a retired teacher, and she is widowed. And at that point just feels a strong need to make a change. So she moves back to her old hometown, and through a series of flukes, I guess you'd call it, she gets an invitation to her 50th high school reunion, and she goes back to look at what's been happening in her old hometown, and discovers that her house, the house she grew up in, is for sale. And since she's sort of at loose ends and not the most emotionally stable after losing her husband, she buys it and moves back and discovers that a lot of things have changed. One of the things is that she realizes that her retirement income isn't going to cover the repairs that have to be done on the house, so that's why she starts up a new business as a freelance book editor.
What are the connections with your own story there? You obviously have stayed in Maine. You haven't moved back to New York, kind of an imaginary trip.
Right, still have a husband.
Yes, you have a husband.
It's a lot of asking what if. I did go back for my 50th high school reunion a couple of years ago, and that started me thinking a lot about the changes in the town I grew up in. And it also rekindled some friendships from back in the day, so that I was more in touch with what people were doing now. And sort of one thing led to the other. And I kept asking myself, well, what if, what if I were widowed? What if I decided I couldn't stay here any longer because it was just too many painful memories? What if my old house came up for sale? So Mickey isn't me, but she has a lot of my background, my memories.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember the last mystery that I read that had an older lady as the protagonist, the detective, the person solving the crime, and I found it sort of exciting. All of a sudden, the story would go on, and Mickey would be adjusting her hearing aid, or there would be a scene where a scooter becomes an element of defense against a bad guy. Are there other mystery writers that you know of that are placing having their main characters be people of a certain age, basically my age? I'm in my late 60s as well. It's sort of exciting to see a hero of my age portrayed with such good effect.
Yeah, well, I know there are a few around, and of course there have always been a few. Mrs. Polifax and Miss Marple and so on come to mind, but Miss Silver. I think what happened in my case was that my editor was interested in an older character. I'm not sure that he was thinking of someone who's 68, but I was encouraged to think along those lines and not just produce another character who's in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it a lot because I can use so much of my own experience, my own memories. With a younger character, you have to constantly be thinking, well, would they get this cultural reference? Because it's from 50 years ago, and they weren't alive yet.
They don't know who Benny Goodman was.
Some of them don't even know who the Beatles are.
Oh, good grief. That's more painful. It must be a big decision to start a new series, because I also read the first book in the Liss MacCrimmon series, and that's now, well, the next book in that series will be book 12, Overkill, coming out in October.
Right, and I'm writing book 13 now.
Oh, you are?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when your series tend to last as long as yours have, it mustn't be a trivial thing to say, oh, I'm going to start a new book and it's going to be a new series. How do you know when you're ready to actually launch an entirely new series?
Well, in this case, I was working on the 10th book in the Liss MacCrimmon series, and it was going well. I had a good idea for that story, but I just didn't have a clue where the series was going to go next. And I thought, well, maybe book 10 is a good place to end it, if I can come up with something else to write that my editor will buy. And they were not opposed to that idea, so I spent about 6 months coming up with a new idea. And the funny thing that happened in the process was that I started getting more ideas for the Liss MacCrimmon books. And so when we actually made the proposal, the publisher wanted the new series, but they also wanted more books in the old series. So I'm happily writing both.
Wow. So what looked like a pause in the action ended up putting you into a whole new period of activity.
Yeah. Well, I've always found that if I have a couple of different projects that I'm working on, they each make the other better. Because when I'm working on one thing, the back of my mind is free to come up with ideas for the one I'm not working on.
Interesting. So they kind of play with each other. One takes a break while the other one is front of mind.
Exactly. Exactly. The only tricky part is making sure deadlines don't come too close together. That'll really mess up the plan.
Are you pretty much done with, you had a face-down mystery series, and then there was a spin-off Mistress Jaffrey series. These are set in 16th century England. What was the last one in those two series?
The last one was Murder in a Cornish Alehouse. That was a Mistress Jaffrey mystery, and those I write under my own name. The two contemporary series are written as Kaitlyn Dunnett. It's done with for the moment. I do have another book that I've written that's in that same time period, but it's not a series book. And my agent has it, so I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. But I think I've done pretty much all I want to with those characters.
I see. Well, the Deadly Edits gives a sort of a frame for maybe there's going to be a fair amount about grammar, punctuation, things that concern English teachers in this series. And in the first one, you talk about the Oxford comma. What is the Oxford comma, and why does it end up being important in crime and punctuation?
Well, it's that optional comma before the last item in a list, and it's usually the word "and" is right before it. And in crime and punctuation, it may or may not be a clue. That's the nice thing about ambiguous grammar rules. Gave her that profession because it sounded like it would be fun to do, and I waffle back and forth between being glad I did it and regretting it, because now people seem to expect me to be an expert on grammar, and I'm not. I don't think I make too many mistakes, but I don't always, I don't even know what parts of speech things are unless I look it up. So it's been a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and you may be attracting readers to this new series who are grammar buffs and will be thinking you're a kindred spirit.
I'm terrified of making a mistake. But I'm sort of going for the fun angle that there are fun ways to remember some rules, and the end of the book will have a little excerpt from Mickey's blog, which she hasn't actually started yet, but where she comes up with funny ways of getting people to remember the difference between further and farther and things like that.
I was curious enough. I did some reading about the Oxford comma, and it looks like people feel strongly about it. The Associated Press, The Economist magazine, New York Times don't use the Oxford comma, and it seems like just about everybody else does. There seems to be an example. If there's a list and you say so-and-so, so-and-so, my parents, and then you don't have the comma, it can look like Lady Gaga and Bill Clinton are married or something.
Well, and it can also cause some real problems, because there was a court case here in Maine not too long ago where leaving out that final comma in a contract between a dairy company and their drivers ended up costing the company about $10 million because the judge took a look at it and ruled that missing comma meant distribution wasn't exempt from overtime pay, and the company had to pay up.
Good Lord.
Which was not their intention.
No, that was one expensive comma.
You leave out that comma, it can have serious consequences.
You mentioned that you write under Kaitlyn Dunnett for the Liss MacCrimmon series, and how do you make those decisions as to which of your writing names you use? Well,
basically, the Lynn Emerson is my real name, and I've used that for several different genres over the years, but these days it's pretty much Kathy writes historical mysteries and Kaitlyn writes present-day mysteries.
I see.
So the two series that are continuing to come out now are both Kaitlyn Dunnett. Most of my older stuff is under my other name. or a couple of other names besides that.
I would think someone who reads one of your books and loves it, wouldn't they maybe be interested in the other books so that if they were all had your name, you would be exposing the different series to a wider audience?
It's really hard to tell because a lot of people who read contemporary mysteries don't have any interest in historical mysteries, or they read one period of history and they don't have any interest in any other period in history. Mm. So it's kind of a good way of letting people know this is one type of book, and if it's the other name, it's a different type of book. And then I have a couple of books, 6 books that I wrote as Kate Emerson that are historical, but they're not historical mystery or historical romance. They're just plain old historical. So a little bit of way to distinguish and not confuse people.
Yeah, and when people find out, I'm sure if somebody wants to read your other type of work, it's from your website and different places they can find it. And so you're not really blocking people from reading the other series. And for some people, it just gives them a sense of comfort. They know what they're getting.
Yeah.
You, being a longtime resident of Maine who has written a lot of books, that made me wonder if your path has ever crossed to Stephen King, if you've gotten to know him at all.
No, our paths have never crossed, but interestingly enough, that's one of the 2 questions that I was most frequently asked back in the days when I did school programs. The one was, do you know Stephen King? And the other one was, how much money do you make?
2 very important questions.
Kids in the 8 to 12-year-old range are very free with what they ask.
That's right. They go right for the important stuff.
Yep.
There was a fun connection because a listener to my show, Mark Roberts, he's the one that first told me about your writing. And when I was looking at your website, I saw that he had created a map of Moose Took a Look, Maine. So you obviously had some back and forth with Mark as he was working on that map.
Right.
Did you learn anything about the fictional town you created in answering his questions while he was creating that map?
Not really, because by that point I'd been making my own very unartistic maps for about 10 years and adding on and erasing things and so on. So I had a pretty good idea of not just the area that is shown in Mark's map, which is great because that's the center of town, the town square and the shops around it, but the map that's up on the back of my office door, taped to the door, shows a much bigger area with all the outlying districts and the where the hotel is and where the mansion is that plays a role in a couple of the earlier books, the Halloween book where they make it a haunted mansion. Yeah,
you created a whole fictional county, it looks like.
Yes, Carrabassett County. It's a long, skinny county between Franklin and Oxford.
Now, did I pronounce that right? Is it Moose Took a Look?
You did.
That's a great name. Given the frequency with which you see moose crossing signs in Maine, that's a good name for a town in western Maine.
Right, and it a lot of people think, initially that it's a real place and want to know where it is. So that's one reason I have maps and so on up at my website, is to make it clear that it's not a real place. I made it up.
Well, having written so many books, I suspect you've got a pretty regular schedule for when you do your writing, what kind of a target you set each day for your writing. What does that part of it look like?
It varies, of course, but as I said, right now I'm working on the 13th book in the Liss MacCrimmon series, which is titled A View to a Kilt. I hate the rough draft stage because I'm not a planner. I don't have an outline, so I never know what's going to come out when I sit down at the computer. But what I try to do is, after I get up and have my coffee and my toast, is to come into my office and sit down and write at least one scene, the next scene in the story. I do that usually 7 days a week. Probably anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours to get something down on paper. It may be terrible, but as long as I have something on the computer screen that I then print, then I have something I can revise and turn into a decent scene. Or in the Deadly Edit series, where the chapters are much shorter, they're chapters rather than scenes, but 4 or 5 pages.
Right.
Usually wind up around 1,500 words a day. I don't aim for a word count. I aim for a scene.
When do you do the editing of scenes already written later in the day, or how do you work that part of it in?
No, I try to go as far as I can without going back, and usually 3 or 4 times during the rough draft I have to go back to the beginning and either add something in that I realized I needed to have happen earlier, or just fiddle around with what I've already got to make it clearer what I'm trying to say. My basic goal is to just get a whole draft. It may be really, really short. It may be really, really terrible. But once I have that and can start revising it, then things perk up considerably.
Then you're like the horse getting to the barn. It's got its own momentum at that point, I suspect.
Right.
Now, your publisher is Kensington in New York.
Right.
What's been the history of your association with different publishers over the time that you've been publishing these books?
Well, the first book that was published, which was sort of a who's who of Tudor women, was with a small scholarly press, which has since gone out of business. Of course, this was back in 1984, so that's not too surprising.
Yeah.
Second book I sold was a children's mystery to Down East Books, which is here in Maine, but again is a very small publisher. And after that, started selling to various New York houses and eventually got an agent and wrote pretty much what anybody would buy. I did a lot of romances and the mysteries you know about, and a couple more children's books, and basically just stubbornly kept at it until somebody was interested.
In 1984, of course, there wasn't a Kindle. There wasn't Kindle Direct Publishing. Some of the options about self-publishing. This certainly has come a long way from what everybody used to think of as vanity press.
Right.
Can you imagine that if you had started now instead of then, do you think you would have gone those 8 years without being published as opposed to trying your hand at self-publishing?
Oh, what a good question. I don't know. And I think it would depend on whether we were also going to make me that age that I was in 1984 or not.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think now if I had a project I really loved and it couldn't find a home with a traditional publisher, I would definitely try to bring it out myself. But all in all, traditional publishing has been very good to me, and I like having somebody else worry about editing and cover art and distribution and all of those things.
Right.
I'm lazy, in other words. I just want to do the writing.
It enables you to focus on the writing. That's a real benefit of it.
Yeah. On the other hand, when I got my rights back to that first book, which by then was hopelessly out of date, I revised the material and put it up online on my webpage for anybody to use for research, and I've added to that, and there are now well over 2,000 mini biographies of women who lived in the Tudor era on that page. And it's sort of, I've used my own research for writing the novels, and every time I'd start research on a novel, I would find more interesting women to add. So it's been my hobby along with writing fiction.
I've heard some writers talk about the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing in terms of the freedom to perhaps create a character that doesn't fit a publisher's idea of the mix of authors and stories that they're handling. And then some of these stories can find huge audiences because people are out there. I'm wondering if you think back to 84 and when just your whole path that was mainly guided by what publishers would buy, were there any characters that you wished you could have found an audience for and you had to kind of abandon, or even a whole genre, a kind of mystery that only you could have written that you didn't write just because there wasn't an outlet?
Not really, because the other option that's there is the small press.
Right.
And there was a stretch when I was between agents and between contracts when I did a 4-book series set in 1888 for a very, very small press, and had a chance to develop characters that nobody in New York seemed to want. and had a wonderful time doing it. And because it was a small press rather than self-publishing, I wasn't responsible for the distribution and the artwork and all of that.
That's sort of the best of both worlds.
Of course, most people have never heard of this particular four-book series, but it exists.
Yep.
And it's out there on ebook now. So,
How about your own reading? I think Mickey Lincoln is reading books on an iPad at one point in the story I read. Are you still reading mainly on paper or sometimes on devices? What's your reading like?
Well, I like being able to enlarge the font. Since, get along in years, you don't see quite as well in those tiny print and paperback novels. But I also read in paper copies, and I reread a lot of the books that are keepers. So it's kind of a combination. And I found that if I have to wait in the dentist's office or something, I just as soon have a paperback with me. And
when you're enlarging the font on an ebook, you're reading Kindle books on that iPad?
My iPad actually has all three major sources of books. So some books, as I'm sure you know, only come out as Kindle. Some come out for Nook and Kindle and iBooks, and it just depends on where I can find it and
yeah, well, it's good to have all three because there are some books that you can only get one place or the other. It seems like the Nook is pretty well fading away. I thought I saw an article today that said you...
Yeah, it seems to be, and I truthfully don't care for the way they format their books. They're not as easy to read as the others, but pretty much anything that I can enlarge big enough to see clearly and not strain my eyes is a hit with me.
I haven't read much in the iBooks platform. Have you found that to be a good reading experience as well as the Kindle?
Yeah, I think both Kindle and iBooks are very easy to read.
So the book that's coming out in October, Overkilt, book 12, is that all finished? That's just sort of in the queue to be published?
Yep, that's finished. It has a cover. Even the advanced reading copies are out already.
What can you tell us about that story?
Well, it's a Thanksgiving book, and it's got a little bit of a darker side. And the original idea came about in part because of the way social media influences otherwise rational people to behave. Which we see every day, but a year or so ago when I was writing it, it was a case of who was donating to what campaigns and that sort of thing. And we've got to boycott LL Bean because Linda Bean supported something or other. And it was a big fuss, and it was totally ridiculous because she's one person on a board of directors.
Yeah.
Anyway, that got me thinking about how out of hand some people get with deciding that this is bad, we must boycott it, we must ruin their business. And so I have Liss's father-in-law, who owns the Spruces, the hotel in Moose Took-a-Look, come up with a Thanksgiving promotion to get young couples who don't particularly want to spend the holiday with their families to come to the hotel to celebrate Thanksgiving. Perfectly innocent idea, right? Except some group decides that this is an affront to family values, and they decide to boycott and picket and have a demonstration in the town square, and the whole thing just balloons out of proportion. And, of course, there's a dead body that turns up in the middle of it because it is a murder mystery.
That's right. There's got to be a dead body.
There's got to be a dead body, right. So that was where the idea came from. And as Liss says, before the body shows up, that she thinks the whole thing is a case of overkill, or in her case, since she has a Scottish gift shop, overkilt. I do try to put I try to use the title somewhere in the story, even though I may not be the one who came up with it.
I've been speaking with author Lynn Emerson. Thanks very much, Kathy.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. My guest next week will be Donna Kastner, founder and chief trailblazer of a movement named Retirepreneur. based in Cleveland. As that name suggests, Donna's initiative helps pre-retirees to prepare for a vigorous, purposeful life well beyond the time work in the past simply ended at a certain age. I've heard from some of you who are having difficulty listening to the podcast because of the changes I've made in kind of the back end of the show. And if you are having any difficulties as a result of the changes, please send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com so that I can bring them to the attention of New Flight Media and we can get everything working smoothly. I will be talking to you next week from Ocean Park, Maine as the summer gets underway.